Alright, so basically we're going to talk about swim baits. Swim baits range anywhere from your little 3-inch baits, these little, hollow bellies, all the way up to the big boy baits, 8-inch Huddlestons. Throwing these baits aren't for the faint of heart. You're throwing $25, $30 baits into areas that, may not get them back. Basically, when you're throwing swim baits, having the right gear is crucial. Basically, when you throw, these baits alone right here, this thing weighs about 4 ounces. But for a bait that big, you can see, an 8-foot rod. It's rated, I think it's 2 to 8 ounces, with a 400 size salmon reel, basically, loaded with 30-pound test. This is the ROF 5, and basically with the 5-inch Huddleston, they don't come with a top hook like the ROF 12. So basically, the different ROFs is how fast they fall. The 5 is going to basically stay more subsurface, 1 to 5 foot range. This one's made to fish deeper. So basically, with this, you're going to want to take. I'll go over the rigging on that later because that's a little more complicated. But this spring alone, I've thrown a lot of what Huddleston calls their 68 special. So years ago, people had the 6-inch bait, which is just a straight, just the normal, this is the weedless, but just the 6-inch bait with that smaller tail. And they weren't getting the thump they wanted out of it because the difference between the two tails is tremendous in terms of what Huddleston calls their vortex, which is their patented, basically this whirlpool it gives off that draws the fish in. So you can see the different size tail. That the 8-inch tail gives off so much more drawing power, and you'll hear me talk about that a lot, especially in clear water. You want something that draws those fish from a distance. So what people started to do is they took, $30 bait, cut the tail off, and glued it onto a 6-inch bait. Well, Ken at Huddleston decided to start making what he calls the 68 special, which is basically the profile of a 6-inch bait with the 8-inch tail. And as you can see, this guy's been through some battle wounds this year. This thing's alone's caught me about 25 fish this year, anywhere from 2 to 5 pounds, both smallmouth and largemouth. And with this, it's about a 2-ounce bait, so I'm throwing it on a Dobbins 784 or 744, either one, which is basically, it's only rated up to 1 ounce, but it's got a heavy enough tip that it doesn't affect it too much, which I can see anything. I mean, it doesn't draw down too much. And I'm throwing this with just your typical bait caster with 20-pound fluorocarbon. And fluorocarbon, to me, is really crucial in this because when you're throwing a bait like this, you're trying to basically resemble the most natural thing that these bass are eating, which is a trout. And fluorocarbon line is invisible underwater. So basically, the good thing about the Huddlestons is they have no negative cues. Fish are going to swim up to it, and it's going to look like a real trout swimming with the tail going. It's one of those baits that no matter how many times you throw it on a lake, they're going to keep eating it. There's lakes, Senkos. I mean, what does that look like in nature? It doesn't really, mimic anything that they're actually going to eat. They still eat them, don't get me wrong. But this is a bait that 9 times out of 10 if the fish are feeding on trout, especially springtime, when the water's under 60 degrees and those trout get planted into those lakes, first thing those largemouth keying on are these, or the rainbows. HUD makes them in different patterns. You have the perch. The weedless, until he redesigns it, I don't recommend it. The hookup percentage on them is pretty piss poor. I had to really modify it, and even then, you're still hooking maybe 20 or 30% of the fish you actually get to eat it. And that's one thing about swim baits, is when you're throwing a swim bait, you will learn where the biggest fish live in that lake. No matter what. You may not catch them that day, but you will know exactly where they live. The first day I threw this on the lake by my house, Beaver Lake, never thrown a swim bait, threw it there. Within 3 docks, I had an 8-pounder, a 7-pounder, and an 8-pounder follow it back to the boat. To this day, I went and stuck one of them. But, I mean, it's a bait that you will draw out the biggest fish, and you can come back at different times throughout the year. And big fish like that, year in and year out, are territorial. Those big females kind of have their own little area on the lake that they like to sit in. Once it gets a little bit warmer, the boot tail style that HUD has kind of draws off, so that's when I start to go to my hard swim baits. So you got the Spurl DBZ, the triple trout. These have a bigger wobble You know, they don't look too natural when they swim, but it's just something erratic that when those bass are in 70-degree water, they're ready to chase down stuff, which is when you guys are throwing frogs and whatnot, they're ready to come up and eat something on the top. You can burn these. One thing I always suggest with any hard bait is changing out the hardware. The place that companies skimp the most is in the hooks and the split rings. And I've seen plenty of guys lose personal bests because they went and just kept the stock hooks on there. 8-pounder eats it, bends the hook out. I always run owner hooks. These are the ST41s with a owner hyperwire split ring. Both those are battle tested, battle approved down in California for all those big Mondo double-digit fish. And then we have, as well, once the fish are done spawning, post-spawn style line throughs. Basically, I don't have one rigged up. It goes through the nose, comes out here at the belly, so you have a big treble hook that sits down here. One good thing about this, fish grabs it, pulls the hook out, so now your bait's sliding up. One thing with swim baits is you're throwing a heavy bait, the fish shaking its head has a lot of leverage, throwing 4 ounces of weight around. A lot of times they will come unpinned because of just straight drag on the fish itself. And so with those, I've caught one day on Lake Washington post spawn with smallmouth. Obviously, I was throwing a 5-inch size. I think we caught about 25 fish in 3 hours between 2 and 4 pounds just around the docks when they're garden fry. It's a bait that swim baits are baits that in Washington not a lot of guys throw. Not a lot of guys really realize the true potential of them. And there's days where I can't stress enough, guys get really discouraged when you see fish after fish follow it all the way to the boat and not eat it. And there's days where that will happen. Don't get me wrong. There's days where you will have 50, 60 fish follow this thing to the boat and not one of them will eat it. And we're talking fish anywhere between 1 pound to 10 pounds or over that. It's frustrating. Then there's other days where literally you're not getting follows. The next thing that happens is this thing's down their throat. And you'd be surprised when you have a 2-pound fish that takes a 6-inch bait balled up in its throat like that. They're able to eat it. I've seen it firsthand. I've had them hit 3 feet from the boat. That's the worst because it's just like a frog bite. When you see the fish coming and you see them eat it, you always swing too early. But I like long casts are key. So that's why the longer rods. You see. This rod's a 7'8", this rod's an 8 foot. Something that can wing it way out there so you've got a long retrieve. Basically, the closer it gets to the boat, the less likely you are to get bit. For smallmouth in general, I've caught a lot of fish on the Huddleston, but it's not a bait that I would specifically target smallmouth with. The internal weighted system in here, just unless they're really trying to eat it, they're not gonna fully get that bait unless they're really on a bite where they're trying to basically just crush as many trout as possible. In a situation for smallmouth, if I know I'm strictly going to a smallmouth lake like Whatcom, I'll throw a teed-up swimmer made by KGM down in Kent on anywhere from a 1/4 ounce to a 1 ounce revenge head. So just these swim bait heads. And you see there's different colors. There's a kokanee pattern or the rainbow trout pattern. Basically, you want to match the hatch. Basically, like fly fishing, you want to match what those fish are keying in on. If you know that there's rainbows in that lake, I'd be throwing a rainbow bait. If there's a lake that doesn't have rainbows, I'd be throwing something, a perch pattern. Like Chambers Lake would fine with a perch pattern. I've seen it. Clear Lake down in California doesn't have rainbow trout in it at all. It only has hitch, but the fish will still eat a rainbow trout just because of the action. This thing, I don't even know what it looks like anymore with no paint on it. And, the fish are still eating it. The bait's, it's been super glued back together. I've had to glue the weight back in, but it's one of those baits that if I'm catching a bunch of big fish on it, obviously I'm going to keep throwing it. So the HUDs I like that, the heavier rod. For a rod like the bait like the teed-up swimmer, you want something more with a parabolic bend. And I like this Loomis 953 swim bait rod. It's a 711, and it's a 1/2 ounce to 2 ounce. So it's perfectly fine for you know, smallmouth. You're not gonna, you know, wall up a big smallmouth, you know, over 8 pounds on this, more than likely. But with the T-Dub swimmer, it's a bite that can be very frustrating. Last year on Whatcom in the summer, throwing the T-Dub swimmer off a point. You'll hear me talk about points when I give a diagram. On one cast alone, the first cast I made off the point, I was just slow rolling back to the boat, got thumped, swung, fish wasn't there, kept reeling, fish hit it again, finally on the 4th hit, the fish ate it. So that's one thing, if you get bit and swing and miss, try to keep that retrieve going. Because a lot of times, they'll look like a trout, try to scurry away, and that fish will come back up and eat it again. There's times where Rosker fished it 2 weeks ago, and probably one of my most frustrating days ever swim baiting. I had about 20 largemouth, anywhere between 3 and 7.5 pounds, hit this, but every time they came up and ate it, they ate it right there. They always grabbed it right behind the hook to the point where this is how I had to super glue it because they kept ripping it apart. And for whatever reason, you know, it's one of those deals where I can't explain why they do it, but there's days where they just will not eat it. They'll basically come up and headbutt it, and they just won't open their mouth to eat it. You know, you see it come next to the dock, and you see the fish come out and just basically clock it on its side, but there's nothing you can do about that. Guys will run stinger hooks down here on the back. I'm not a huge proponent of it because of a few times I've had fish swallow it. The last thing I want is a treble hook down here going into their gills, you know, because you don't want to end up killing a fish. So basically with the Huds, it's a big fish bait. You throw it year round. I'm going to throw it a lot at night this year. I do a lot of night fishing in the summer. It's for whatever reason, a lot of guys don't throw it in our state. You know, I've caught plenty of fish on it. You know, had plenty of big fish fall. Some of the biggest fish I found in lakes, Beaver Lake by my house, a dock I'd never seen a big fish on before earlier this year. Threw up next to the dock twice, nothing. Third cast, right, same, you know, exact cast next to the dock, had a fish about 10.5 pounds come out from underneath the dock and follow it 40 feet to the boat. And, you know, it's heartbreaking when you just see that fish swim back under the boat and you're like, oh, there she goes. But it's, you know, now you know where that big fish is. So the biggest thing with swim baits is you have to have confidence. There are days where you will not get bit, there's days you won't get follows, but the days where they're eating it, make up for it. I mean, because you're basically targeting trophy fish. You know, it's not, it can be a numbers bait, especially the 6-inch size, but it's not a bait that I'm going out there and throwing expecting to catch 25, 30 fish a day. You know, I'm going out there expecting to catch, you know, anywhere from 1 to 5 fish, but I know those 1 to 5 fish are going to be, you know, the quality ones that, you know, you want to win in a tournament. So dissecting spots, that's the biggest, one of the biggest things